Monsieur le Président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil, je vous remercie pour la convocation de cette troisième réunion d'urgence sur la situation qui prévaut à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo. Je remercie la représentante spéciale du secrétaire général, Madame Bintou Keïta, ainsi que l'envoyé spécial du secrétaire général pour la région des Grands Lacs, Monsieur Chia Huang, pour leurs exposés respectifs. Je salue également la présence des représentants permanents des différents pays de la région des Grands Lacs, ici présents. Le Rwanda prépare un carnage à ciel ouvert avec une brutalité qui rappelle les heures les plus sombres de notre histoire. Le 26 janvier, j'avais prévenu. Aujourd'hui, ces mots sont réalité. En 48 heures seulement, plus de 4000 morts à Goma, des hommes et des femmes abattus, des enfants témoins d'exécutions sommaires, tués sans distinction ou exécutés avec une précision glaçante, comme le chef coutumier de Kiziba, abattu avec son épouse et ses 3 enfants le 11 février, comme l'artiste Delka Idengo, assassiné le 13 février pour imposer le silence. Et ce que nous ne savons n'est qu'une infime partie de l'horreur qui nous parvient. Mais l'horreur ne s'arrête pas aux exécutions. À Goma, la vie est suspendue, prise en otage par la guerre. Plus de 4500 blessés ont afflué vers des hôpitaux débordés. 500 corps ont été retrouvés calcinés dans la prison de Munzenze après des exécutions en masse. Chaque jour, la Croix-Rouge et le CICR ramassent des cadavres dans les rues, tandis que les morgues dépassent leurs capacités. Dans des camps de fortune, les cas de Mpox, choléra et rougeole se propagent, menaçant des milliers de déplacés sans accès à l'eau potable. Ceux qui survivent risquent de mourir autrement, sans aide, sans soins, sans évacuation. Les humanitaires sont pris pour cible, l'accès aux sinistrés bloqué. Voilà ce qui se passe quand un groupe terroriste prend le contrôle d'une ville et impose son administration criminelle sous le regard de ce Conseil. Ce Conseil qui observe, ce Conseil qui condamne, mais ce Conseil qui n'agit pas. Et maintenant, Bukavu. Même scénario. Pillage, hôpitaux détruits, routes coupées. Une guerre qui tue aussi par la faim et la privation des soins. Mais là encore, ce n'est pas suffisant pour ceux qui mènent cette campagne de terreur. À la privation s'ajoute l'exécution. À l'effondrement humanitaire s'ajoute la barbarie. Hier, le 18 février, le Haut Commissariat aux droits de l'homme a rapporté que des exécutions d'enfants auraient été perpétrées par la coalition RDF M23. Oui, des enfants, abattus comme des cibles. Que reste-t-il de l'humanité lorsque même les plus jeunes, les plus innocents sont exécutés? Monsieur le Président, nous avons entendu cette formule devenue un refrain commode des solutions africaines pour des problèmes africains, mais qui ose encore s'en servir aujourd'hui comme prétexte à l'inaction. La communauté de développement de l'Afrique australe, SADC, et la communauté économique des États d'Afrique centrale, CEAC, ont unanimement condamné la présence rwandaise sur notre sol. Ce fait n'est plus contesté. 2 sous-régions, la SADC et l'EAC, ont tenu des réunions conjointes pour adopter des mesures urgentes, y compris un cessez-le-feu. Quant à l'Union africaine, son Conseil de paix et de sécurité, réuni au niveau des chefs d'État le 14 février, a appelé au retrait immédiat de toutes les forces étrangères non invitées de la RDC. En d'autres termes, le Rwanda. Le Rwanda et le M23 ont répondu et continuent de répondre par la violence, par la terreur. Face à l'aggravation rapide de la situation, de nombreux acteurs ont réagi en faisant ce qu'ils savent faire de mieux. Documenter les violations des droits de l'homme, ouvrir la voie à des poursuites pénales, poser des actes forts, mais essentiellement réactifs. Nous saluons la récente décision du Conseil des droits de l'homme de l'ONU d'ouvrir une enquête sur les exactions dans l'Est de la RDC, ainsi que l'appel de la CPI à recueillir des éléments de preuve sur ces crimes pour traduire les responsables en justice. Nous appuyons également La résolution du Parlement européen demandant la suspension de l'accord sur les matières premières entre l'Union européenne et le Rwanda, signé en février 2024, alors que Kigali armait le M23. Mais ce Conseil, toujours inactif, est le seul capable d'empêcher de nouveaux massacres et l'expansion de l'occupation. Il lui revient d'adopter des mesures robustes qui non seulement arrêtent les violences perpétrées par les troupes rwandaises et leurs supplétifs du M23, mais aussi mettent un coup d'arrêt au soutien d'un État membre de l'ONU à un groupe terroriste cherchant à renverser un gouvernement légitime et démocratiquement élu. Ce conflit ne se limite pas aux violences militaires, au pillage de nos ressources ou au dépeuplement de nos territoires. C'est un projet politique porté par le Rwanda à travers le M23 et l'AFC visant à renverser notre régime par la force. Mais la République démocratique du Congo a fait le choix de la démocratie. Une démocratie en construction, certes, mais la nôtre. Nous avons choisi la liberté sous un régime civil et non la soumission aux armes. Nul ne peut nous arracher ce choix, surtout pas un régime qui, depuis 3 décennies, s'efface derrière un homme qui confond l'État avec son pouvoir personnel. Ce contraste est saisissant. D'un côté, un peuple qui bâtit son avenir sur la volonté populaire, de l'autre, un régime qui ne survit que par la force, l'intimidation et la répression. Aujourd'hui, ce modèle de gouvernance par la peur tente de s'imposer chez nous. Ce n'est pas seulement une guerre pour un territoire, mais une guerre contre notre choix souverain d'un avenir différent. Le M23 et ses soutiens rwandais cherchent à imposer par les armes ce que les urnes ont rejeté. Mais le peuple congolais dit non. Un peuple dont l'âge moyen est de moins de 25 ans, un peuple marqué par la guerre et les promesses ajournées, mais qui refuse la loi des armes. Il veut choisir ses dirigeants dans les urnes et non sous la menace des canons. Il refuse d'être la génération sacrifiée d'une violence imposée de l'extérieur. Mr. President, this Council must act. It can no longer remain a silent witness to an unfolding tragedy, nor hide behind declarations of intent. The time for theoretical debates is over. It is now time to uphold the very principles that define this institution: peace, security, and respect for international law. International law that is universal and applies to all, even while seeking African solutions. Standing by silently while civilians are killed is not a solution, and certainly not an African one. We reiterate the urgency of these measures and demand immediate action. First, the Security Council must order an end to Rwanda's hostilities and demand the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of its troops from Congolese territory. These forces have trampled on international law, brought death and devastation, and violated our sovereignty. Their withdrawal is not negotiable, it is an imperative. Second, the Security Council must impose targeted sanctions, including asset freezes and travel bans, on the command structure of the Rwandan Defense Forces and the political decision-makers responsible for this aggression, including those who feign ignorance of their own troops' whereabouts. Thousands of Rwandan soldiers are leading M23 operations in our country, while their president, in a calculated display of plausible deniability, says, "I don't know." But you, members of the Council, know. We all know. The survivors who had to bury 4,000 bodies in Goma know. And in Goma, those graves bear witness. Third, the Security Council must impose a total ban on the export of all minerals from Rwanda, particularly coltan and gold, in order to end the looting of our resources. The DRC has taken its own measures by designating several mining sites as red zones, including Rubaya, from where Rwanda fraudulently exports over 150 tons of coltan each month. But national measures alone are not enough. As long as Rwanda is allowed to launder our resources with impunity, this war will continue. Fourth, the Security Council must immediately revoke Rwanda's status as a troop-contributing country to United Nations peacekeeping missions. A country that besieges MONUSCO bases, targets its aircrafts, and launches deadly attacks on UN peacekeepers, then goes further, using the repatriation of fallen peacekeepers as a political bargaining chip, has defied the very principles of peacekeeping. This contradiction erodes the credibility of the United Nations. Rwanda's status must be revoked without delay. Fifth, the Security Council must impose a strict notification and monitoring mechanism for any sale or transfer of arms to Rwanda. Every shipment of weapon destined for Kigali must be declared, traced, and closely monitored. It is unacceptable that arms continue to reach groups responsible for massacres and regional destabilization and under United Nations sanctions. Monsieur le Président, 3 réunions en moins d'1 mois. Aujourd'hui, vous avez tous condamné le Rwanda dans vos discours. Je m'excuse. Tous, sauf les A3, à savoir l'Algérie, la Somalie et la Sierra Leone. Mais il n'y a toujours pas de résolution. Le temps des compromis interminables est révolu. Il est temps d'agir. La République démocratique du Congo exige un vote public dans les plus brefs délais sur une résolution qui dénonce clairement l'occupation du Rwanda et qui exige le retrait de ses troupes. Une résolution qui défend la Charte des Nations Unies. Assez de prétextes, assez de relativisme culturel derrière lequel se cache un attentisme aux conséquences tragiques. Que chacun assume sa position au grand jour. Monsieur le Président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil, il est temps de voter. Je vous remercie.
我感谢卡伊宽巴瓦格纳女士阁下的发言。下面我请卢旺达代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. Allow me first to congratulate you on your presidency and leadership of this council. I also thank Ambassador Huang Xie and SRC Bintu Keita for their briefings. I also recognize the participation of Honorable Teresa Kaikamba Wagner, Minister of Foreign Affairs of DRC, and the representatives of Kenya, Angola, Burundi, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. Mr. President, Rwanda commends the regional efforts led by the East African Community and the Southern African Development Corporation, SADC, particularly the joint summit held in Dar es Salaam on 8 February 2025. The joint summit meeting resulted in positive outcomes, including 1, a call for a ceasefire, 2, urgent humanitarian support, and 3, the merger of the Rwanda and Nairobi peace processes to be led by a panel of facilitators from different regions under President Lorenzo. The joint EAC-SADC summit also directed resumption of direct negotiations and dialogue with all state and non-state parties, military and non-military, including the M23. These outcomes were endorsed by an extraordinary AU Peace and Security Council meeting at the head of state level, held on 14 February 2025, as well as the AU Assembly of Heads of State, held on 15th to 16th February 2025. Mr. President, Rwanda appreciates the support of those in this council who value Africa-led solutions. We remain fully engaged in these efforts and continue to support them with good faith and full commitment. However, we must condemn the actions of those, including a DRC, who undermine these efforts by lobbying Western capitals instead of engaging with African leadership and regional mechanisms. Despite the critical nature of the recent regional discussions, the DRC has consistently opted for virtual presence or outright disengagement in these key meetings. While regional leaders gathered at the AU summit to address the Eastern DRC security situation, the president of DRC, President Tshisekedi, was instead seen at the Munich Security Conference, continuing to call for sanctions and lobbying for sanctions against Rwanda rather than engaging in direct dialogues. Other heads of state were sitting in Addis trying to find solutions to these problems. So the biggest beneficiary of these discussions could have been benefited by being in that room. I cannot emphasize this enough. African leadership must drive the resolution of this conflict. Failure to support regional solutions has exacerbated instability in the past. This is why Rwanda calls for the full endorsement of the AU-backed EAC-SADC Joint Summit outcomes. Furthermore, at the heart of this crisis is a dangerous alliance between the DRC government and external actors, mainly the FDL genocidal militia, who have fueled the ethnic rhetoric and enabled extremism to thrive for decades, but also the Burundian forces, the Sami DRC, as well as European mercenaries. Council members, instead of committing to inclusive dialogue, the DRC has consistently undermined regional mechanisms, pitted regional blocs against each other, disregarded ceasefires, refused dialogue with its own people, and escalated ethnic-based violence. Mr. President, Council members, since the fall of Goma, regional leaders have worked tirelessly to broker peace. Yet, the DRC government has responded by reinforcing its front lines with more troops and Burundian forces. This reckless militarization, coupled with state-sponsored incitement to violence, has created a lawless environment. The uncontrolled distribution of weapons has even led former DRC government-aligned militia to turn against Kinshasa. This we have always said. When a state actor proliferates and distributes weapons to negative armed groups, like the different Wazalendo groups, what you reap is chaos. And what we've seen in terms of the magnitude of loss of life caused by Wazalendo, and all these young people who have been given thousands of weapons and mobilized and turned against each other, that's what we reap. Inflammatory statements from DRC officials, such as those made by the Honorable Minister in the previous Council meeting on the 29th January 2025, calling for, and I quote, the streets to take over, have worsened the situation. Indeed, soon after the Honorable Minister's foretelling in this Council, we observed cases of youth mobilization in 2 armed militia in South Kivu, led by known RDC officers. Arming young civilians in an already unstable context is not only reckless, but an outright incitement to hatred and violence. And there is a lot of misinformation here. When FARDC forces were proliferating arms and including arming children, nobody talked about this, nobody spoke. And now you see misinformation about execution of children. I repeat, the proliferation of arms by a state actor to negative armed groups, and there are over 250 armed groups documented in DRC. That is a recipe for disaster. And that's the disaster that we continue to see. Arms should be proliferated to designated trained officers and military officers. The situation has deteriorated to the point where we see a lot of humanitarian challenges. Rwanda cannot take the blame for the problems that DRC has faced endemically. As President Kagame stated in Addis Ababa, and I quote, "We have our own problems to deal with. Congo is too big for Rwanda to carry on its back," end of quote. Rwanda has no interest in DRC's internal struggles. Allegations of land grabbing in courts or corrupt or occupation ignore fundamental power imbalances at play in the DRC. Our sole priority has always been and will always remain the security of our borders and the stability of our nation. We have stated over and over again the existential security threat that Rwanda faces from DRC. And these we take very seriously. Council members, Rwanda continues to welcome refugees fleeing the violence in the DRC, despite persistent calls from the DRC and its allies to impose sanctions on Rwanda. Ironically, among those crossing into Rwanda are the same security threats we have repeatedly warned this esteemed council about. On 29th January, over 280 foreign mercenaries, along with over 100 Congolese soldiers, crossed into Rwanda territory, exposing the FARDC's long-standing use of foreign fighters with no reaction whatsoever from the international community. Yet, as we have repeatedly said, the use of mercenaries by state actors contravenes the 1989 United Nations Convention and the 1977 OAU Convention, which prohibits and illegalizes the use of mercenaries by states. More concerning is the international community's reluctance to address the existential threat Rwanda faces, the ethnic cleansing of Congolese Tutsi, and the misinterpretation of the conflict. Instead of acknowledging the DRC's responsibility, blame has been conveniently shifted, first to Rwanda, and now even to former President Joseph Kabila. When will this blame game end? I think someone here has to take responsibility. Reality has always been clear. The M23's resurgence is rooted in decades-long persecution of Congolese communities based on ethnicity, predating Rwanda's current government. Rwanda has consistently warned that the FDR is central to this crisis. Since 2018, over 20 incursions have been launched into Rwanda, particularly in the southern province and in the northwestern region. Despite claim that the FDR is a weakened force, its active collaboration with and financing by FARDC proves otherwise. The DRC government must recognize that its coalition with the FDR destabilizes Rwanda and perpetuates suffering among Congolese civilians. Ignoring the FDR's role is a failure to hold accountable those responsible for exporting extremist ideology beyond Rwanda's borders. But beyond the FDR council members, Rwanda is also concerned by a myriad of foreign forces deployed along its borders, namely the Burundian forces that share the same ethnic ideology as the FDR, SAMI DRC, and the remaining mercenaries. We are also concerned by the president of DRC's push for more foreign troops he is currently requesting from other African countries. All those foreign forces need to withdraw from Eastern DRC as they constitute a direct threat to Rwanda's security. In fact, when Goma fell, FARDC, Burundian forces, and FDLR forces turned their weapons on Rwanda, killing 16 innocent civilians and wounding 177 civilians, and destroying their properties and livelihoods. Yet no country condemned this blatant violation of Rwanda's sovereignty. Rwanda has no choice but to strengthen its defense and will continue to do so. Mr. President, on the question of MONUSCO, we have been very, very clear, and Rwanda's position remains peacekeepers have to be safe, peacekeepers have to be protected, and that is a canon that we respect, and we have said it over and over again. However, transparency is also very important. Information to the Council that is accurate is critical. There is critical information that we believe SRSG Bintu Keita should have shared with the Council on MONUSCO's collaboration with M23, and specifically the outcome of a meeting that was held yesterday between DSRSG, Vivian Van der Per, and the leader of AFC/M23, Corneille Nangaa. We believe that that information would have been critical to share so that at least the Council knows. Mr. President, regarding mineral exploitation, the responsible parties are well known who exploit DRC. Rwanda holds no mining concession in the DRC, yet we continue to be falsely accused. The claim that mineral resources fuel this conflict is false and inciting. The M23 issue is about people fighting for their rights and survival. fighting for their inherent citizenship rights and access to their own ancestral property. Rwanda cannot be scapegoated for the DRC's economic dysfunction. It is Congolese officials who benefit most from instability and the corrupt mining sector, whereas Rwanda has always promoted responsible sourcing and formalized trade to curb smuggling and illicit activities in mining. Mr. President, Council members, Rwanda remains committed to regional mechanisms to neutralize the FDLR and ensure the withdrawal of all foreign forces that threaten our security. These steps are essential for Rwanda's stability and lasting regional peace. Once these conditions are met, Rwanda will adjust its defensive measures accordingly. We urge the DRC to engage genuinely in the EAC SADC peace process and call on the international community to support these Africa-led initiatives rather than imposing counterproductive measures. If sanctions or punitive measures were the solution to this region's problems, Rwanda would be the first to support them. However, history has shown otherwise. These only deepen division and undermine regional peace efforts. To conclude, Mr. President, Council members, Rwanda remains guided by the firm belief that our region's future depends on unity, shared prosperity, and inclusive peace. The historical and cultural ties between our communities hold untapped potential, and we hope that through dialogue and cooperation, we can bring lasting peace and development this region desperately needs. I thank you.
我感谢卢旺达代表的发言，下面我请安哥拉代表发言。
Mr. President, thank you for giving us the floor. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, we acknowledge the presence of Her Excellency Therese Kayekwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie from the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and His Excellency Ambassador Ernest Raimusiyo, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda to the United Nations. We thank Mrs. Binto Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary General in the DRC and Head of United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in DRC, and Mr. Wang Shi, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lake region, for their comprehensive briefings. Mr. President, we are holding the third Security Council emergency meeting in less than a month to address the situation in Eastern DRC as the M23 continues widening its offensive and making significant military advances in Nord-Kivu and Sud-Kivu provinces, despite calls by this Council, the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, and other actors in the international community to halt its operations. Angola firmly and unequivocally condemns and repudiates these actions, which can have unforeseen consequences for regional peace and security if not stopped now. We are very concerned with these latest developments and reiterate our call for the immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities, the withdrawal of M23 from occupied areas, as well as the end to the establishment of parallel administration in the DRC territory. In line with the UN Charter, the international law, and the principle of sovereign equality of all member states, the sovereignty, independence, and unity and territorial integrity of DRC must be respected and upheld. Angola calls on the parties to the conflict to respect international humanitarian law and international human rights, protect civilians, internal displaced people's camps and medical camps, and safeguard the integrity and safety of peacekeepers and humanitarian personnel. Attacks against civilians and peacekeepers constitute war crimes, and the perpetrators must be held accountable. As any other country, DRC has the right to live in peace and security to achieve sustainable development. This Council has the responsibility to assist the people and the government of DRC to achieve these aspirations by acting swiftly and decisively to prevent further escalation of this conflict and promote its peaceful resolution through the Rwanda and Nairobi processes. We call on the members of the Security Council to work expeditiously to adopt a resolution, namely urging the immediate and unconditional ceasefire and cessation of hostilities, and the peaceful resolution of the conflict through the Rwanda and Nairobi processes, in line with the communiques of the Joint East African Community and SADC Summit of Heads of State and Government, convened on 8 February 2025, and the Peace and Security Council of the African Union meeting at the Heads of State and Government level, held on 14 February 2025. Mr. President, on 14 February, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola, who was mandated by the African Union as chair of the International Conference on the Great Lake region to ensure mediation of the crisis between DRC and Rwanda, presented a report to the Peace and Security Council of the African Union outlining his efforts to achieve peace to this protracted conflict. He stressed that the progress made under the Rwanda process must be preserved and upheld, which include the declaration of ceasefire of 4 August 2024, the adoption of the harmonized plan for the neutralization of the FDLR and the disengagement force lifting of defense security measure by Rwanda, the adoption of the concept of operations, CONOPS, and the operationalization of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism. Please note that the only pending matter to finalize and consolidate the draft peace agreement proposed by the mediator is the divergency regarding the resolution of the M23 issue, which falls within the scope of the Nairobi process. It is important to emphasize that the M23 issue is not objectively and directly part of the Rwanda process mandate, since it has always been understood that the matters relating to the different armed groups operating within DRC should be dealt with within the framework of the Nairobi process. His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço has reiterated time and time again that the conflict and security challenge in the eastern DRC have no military solution and urged the parties to return to the negotiating table immediately. He continues making diplomatic efforts in favor of peace and stability in the DRC, now in a new and additional role as the chair of the African Union since 15 February 2025. At the sidelines of the Peace and Security Council meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, on 14 February, he met His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, and yesterday in Luanda, Angola, he hosted His Excellency Felix Tshisekedi, President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, to discuss the way forward. We call on the international community and the Security Council to continue supporting the ongoing regional initiatives to enhance coordination, harmonization, and complementarity between Rwanda and Nairobi process to promote African solutions to African problems. Mr. President, a speed and unconditional de-escalation of the conflict and the genuine and renewed engagement of the parties to explore ways of overcoming the pending issue are paramount to create a political environment conducive to a peaceful solution under the Rwanda and Nairobi processes. We encourage all the parties to avoid any actions or rhetoric that can further escalate tensions, including provocative language or inflammatory public statements, since they are counterproductive to the diplomatic efforts to achieve lasting solution to this conflict that has prevailed for so long. As His Excellency President João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço stated during the Peace and Security Council of the African Union meeting and I quote, "It is only makes sense to continue the peace effort in the eastern of DRC if there is serious engagement from the parties and coherence regarding the commitments made, so that the time and energy are not wasted on actions that have been undertaken to restore peace to this attacked sister country." End of quote. I thank you for your attention.
我感谢安哥拉代表的发言，下面我请肯尼亚代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Kenya congratulates the People's Republic of China on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of February and commends Algeria for its stewardship in January. We also thank the briefers as well as Minister Wagner of the Democratic Republic of Congo and my colleague peers from the region. Mr. President, Kenya is concerned. Kenya is deeply concerned over the escalating unrest in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, which imperils the stability of our entire Great Lakes region. The loss of lives of civilians and peacekeepers and the displacement of persons that characterize the conflict compound the already dire humanitarian situation in Eastern DRC. We reiterate the call of the joint EAC SADC summit for an immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities by all the conflicting parties and the withdrawal of foreign actors from the DRC. The attendant effects of the unrest remain dire for the entire Great Lakes region. Widespread displacement of persons, an influx of refugees, the spread of infectious diseases, and increased arms proliferation. In addition, the threat of terrorism posed by ISIS DRC risks burgeoning as the group leverages the unrest to advance its nefarious activities. Mr. President, Kenya is the current chair of the East African Community, and it reiterates the joint EAC SADC summit's position to advance a political rather than a military solution in addressing this conflict. In this regard, we reaffirm our commitment to the Nairobi-Luanda process as the most viable framework for dialogue and reconciliation. We also urge the parties, all parties, to exercise political goodwill and genuinely engage in mediation. We call upon our dear neighbors, DRC, Rwanda, and all others to please tone down the finger pointing and give dialogue a chance. It is in our collective interest as a region. Please let's tone down the finger pointing and give dialogue a chance. It is in our collective interest as a region. Whereas Kenya remains committed to supporting diplomatic efforts to restore stability in Eastern DRC, the international community must do more. We therefore call upon this Council to act decisively to contain the prevailing unrest. We must put an end to the death and humanitarian suffering of local populations. UN agencies and other humanitarian organizations must be given unhindered access. On our part, Kenya remains committed to all efforts that will bring peace and stability, not just to Eastern DRC, but to the entire Great Lakes region. I thank you, Mr. President.
我感谢肯尼亚代表的发言，下面我请布隆迪代表发言。
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi tout d'abord d'exprimer notre reconnaissance à la République populaire de Chine qui assure la présidence de ce Conseil pour le mois de février, pour avoir convoqué cette troisième réunion en un mois sur la situation en République démocratique du Congo. Cette initiative témoigne de l'engagement de la République populaire de Chine envers la paix et la sécurité dans la région des Grands Lacs et son rôle de leadership au sein du Conseil de sécurité. Nous tenons à remercier Madame Bintou Keïta, représentante spéciale du secrétaire général des Nations Unies et chef de la MONUSCO, et M. Xia, envoyé spécial du secrétaire général des Nations Unies pour la région des Grands Lacs, pour leur présentation riche en informations sur la situation en RDC. Je tiens à saluer particulièrement Son Excellence Madame la ministre des Affaires étrangères de la RDC et les collègues qui sont ici présents. Le Burundi tient tout d'abord à rappeler qu'il se trouve en RDC dans le cadre strictement d'un accord bilatéral conformément au communiqué de presse de la FDN du 20 mai 2023. Monsieur le Président, le Burundi, fidèle à ses principes de paix et de solidarité, demeure profondément préoccupé par la détérioration de la situation en RDC. La persistance des conflits, particulièrement à l'est de la RDC, la prise de Goma par le M23 soutenu par le Rwanda et l'occupation prolongée de vastes zones par des forces étrangères constituent une menace grave pour la stabilité régionale. Cette situation met en lumière les limites et faiblesses de nos mécanismes de paix actuels. Et il est impératif que la communauté internationale prenne des mesures immédiates pour prévenir une guerre régionale. À cet égard, le Burundi propose un plan de paix en 5 points qui s'articule autour des principes de dialogue, de coopération régionale et du respect des souverainetés nationales. Nous croyons fermement qu'une solution durable au conflit en RDC nécessite une action collective, urgente et coordonnée. Voici les éléments clés de notre plan de paix. 1. Mobilisation internationale pour éviter l'escalade du conflit. Il est impératif que la communauté internationale, y compris les Nations Unies et les acteurs régionaux, s'engagent de manière urgente pour prévenir l'escalade du conflit en RDC et exercer les pressions nécessaires sur les acteurs impliqués dans l'agression de la RDC en violation des principes cardinaux de la Charte des Nations Unies, notamment la souveraineté et l'intégrité territoriale de la RDC, ainsi que son indépendance politique en vue d'obtenir des actes concrets. Si aucune action immédiate n'est entreprise, la crise pourrait se transformer en un conflit régional plus vaste, menaçant non seulement la RDC, mais aussi toute la région des Grands Lacs. Nous appelons à une réponse rapide, cohérente et déterminée pour éviter un embrasement régional dont personne ne peut prédire avec précision les conséquences sécuritaires et humanitaires dans la région, avec des ramifications possibles sur les autres régions du continent. 2. Le retrait des forces étrangères non invitées et le démantèlement des groupes armés. Pour parvenir à une paix durable, il est nécessaire que les forces étrangères non invitées, y compris celles du Rwanda, se retirent immédiatement de la RDC et respectent son intégrité territoriale. Parallèlement, la communauté internationale doit soutenir activement le démantèlement de tous les groupes armés, à la fois locaux et étrangers, dont les FDLR, qui continuent de nourrir l'instabilité dans la région. Il est crucial que ces actions soient menées de manière à protéger les civils congolais qui sont les principales victimes de cette violence. L'inertie et l'attentisme de la communauté internationale nourrit la poursuite des combats et l'appétit de l'agresseur à poursuivre l'occupation des territoires congolais, ce qui pourrait créer un mauvais précédent de nature à pousser les autres États d'user de la force pour grignoter sur les territoires des autres États indépendants sans craindre l'action de la communauté internationale. Un jour de plus, sans action concrète d'arrêter la guerre à l'est de la RDC, équivaut à des centaines de morts de civils innocents, y compris les femmes et les enfants. Non, agissons vite pour être du bon côté de l'histoire, sinon, en cas d'immobilisme, l'histoire retiendra qu'à un moment donné, la communauté internationale a laissé la situation à l'est de la RDC se dégrader avec des conséquences graves sur le plan sécuritaire et humanitaire. La crédibilité de ce prestigieux Conseil, organe chargé de la paix et de la sécurité internationale, en dépend. 3. Le M23 est la voie du dialogue intercongolais. Quant au M23, il est impératif que ce groupe, s'il se revendique congolais, intègre le processus de paix intercongolais sous la facilitation du président Uhuru Kenyatta, facilitateur désigné par la communauté est-africaine. Ce processus devrait permettre aux Congolais de trouver eux-mêmes des solutions à leurs problèmes sans ingérence extérieure. Nous croyons que le dialogue interne est la seule voie pour arriver à une paix durable en RDC, respectant la souveraineté et l'intégrité du pays. 4. Un cessez-le-feu immédiat et inconditionnel. Nous appelons également à un cessez-le-feu immédiat et sans condition pour permettre l'acheminement de l'assistance humanitaire et créer un environnement propice au dialogue intercongolais. Ce cessez-le-feu serait un premier pas vers une solution pacifique du conflit, réduisant la souffrance des civils, en particulier des femmes et des enfants, qui sont les premières victimes de cette guerre. Une fois respecté, le cessez-le-feu permettra de favoriser un climat favorable au dialogue intercongolais et au retour des déplacés internes et aux réfugiés de retourner dans leur foyer et les élèves à l'école. 5. Renforcement des mécanismes régionaux et internationaux. Enfin, il est crucial de renforcer le Conseil de paix et de sécurité de l'Union africaine et d'assurer un financement suffisant pour les opérations de paix en Afrique. Le Burundi plaide également pour une accélération de l'opérationnalisation de la force africaine en attente afin de permettre à l'Afrique de répondre efficacement à ses propres crises. Une coopération renforcée entre l'Union africaine, les Nations unies et les acteurs régionaux est essentielle pour garantir une réponse cohérente et efficace face à ces défis. Monsieur le Président, le Burundi réaffirme son engagement envers la paix et la stabilité en RDC et dans la région des Grands Lacs. Nous croyons fermement que seule une action collective et une coopération internationale renforcée permettront de surmonter les défis auxquels la RDC est confrontée. Nous appelons tous les membres du Conseil de sécurité à soutenir ce plan de paix dans un esprit de solidarité et de responsabilité partagée pour garantir un avenir pacifique et prospère pour tous les peuples de la région. En définitive, le Burundi, comme beaucoup de pays africains, soutient le projet de résolution REV 2 en circulation sur la RDC dans sa version actuelle et appelle tous les membres du Conseil de sécurité et tout particulièrement, je dis bien tout particulièrement les A3, à savoir l'Algérie, la Sierra Leone et la Somalie, de le soutenir pour respecter le souhait de l'écrasante majorité d'Africains qui condamnent la violation flagrante de la souveraineté et de l'intégrité territoriale de la RDC. Aucun pays, aucun peuple ne souhaiterait que son territoire et sa souveraineté soient violés au grand jour, au vu et au su de tout le monde. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
我感谢布隆迪代表的发言，下面我请南非代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. We wish to once again congratulate the People's Republic of China on assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of February. We thank Special Representative Bintou Keita and Special Envoy Huang Xia for their important briefings. And we acknowledge the presence of Minister of Foreign Affairs of the DRC, Her Excellency Ms. Teresa Kayikwamba Wagner. South Africa wishes to thank the United Nations and its member states for sharing our grief as we mourn the death of our peacekeepers in the Eastern DRC. We express gratitude to all that played a role in the successful repatriation of the remains of our fallen troops. Mr. President, since the emergency meetings of the Security Council on 26 and 28 January 2025, the situation in the Eastern DRC has deteriorated. Despite repeated calls for a ceasefire and restraint, the M23 and its allies continue to capture territories in the eastern region of the DRC. The capital of Nord-Kivu, Goma, as well as other cities such as Bukavu, are now under the full control of the M23. The supply of electricity, water, humanitarian aid, and communication networks have been disrupted, putting the lives of many injured and the displaced communities at high risk. Mr. President, the recent African Union Summit reiterated the need for all of the parties to the conflict to engage in negotiations towards a sustainable political solution. This decision reinforces the outcomes of the seminal joint summit of the East African Community, the EAC, and the South African Development Community, SADC. We believe that the measure of the Rwanda and Nairobi processes, as decided by the joint summit, is prudent for a harmonized and coherent approach to dealing with the prevailing situation in Eastern DRC. Both processes must prioritize, as a matter of urgency, addressing the proliferation and activities of armed groups. All illegal armed groups and uninvited armed forces from neighboring countries are an obstacle to peace and stability in the entire region. All key actors must demonstrate political will to put an end to the crisis. For this reason, South Africa strongly urges all parties to the conflict to engage in de-escalation efforts, confidence-building measures, and fulfill the already agreed terms of the Luanda process. This includes an immediate ceasefire, the implementation of the harmonization plan for the neutralization of the FDLR, the disengagement of foreign forces in the territory of the DRC, and for all parties to participate fully in the ad hoc verification mission monitoring the ceasefire. Alongside the ongoing political process, all parties must ensure that humanitarian efforts are unimpeded and essential services are restored in Goma and other affected areas. Should the parties fail to reach any meaningful progress, despite myriad efforts and decisions aimed at bringing about peace and stability, the Security Council must assume its role by taking measures within its mandate to prevent further carnage in the Eastern DRC. The situation in the Eastern DRC requires a set of immediate measures to mitigate further death and suffering, and to end the capture and control of territory by the M23 and its allies. In this context, we look forward to this Council adopting the draft resolution before it, and hope that it will help with the immediate cessation of hostilities and aid the political process. In conclusion, Mr. President, for the African continent to prosper, we need to truly silence the guns and harness our collective efforts towards development-focused solutions to prolonged challenges. Together, let us make a paradigm shift from the battlegrounds of war to the corridors of diplomacy, and seek solutions through compromise above the rigid ideologies of war that often seek absolute victories. History has taught us that absolute victories in war are hollow and simply allow for the continuation of conflict in different forms, often for decades to come. The parties to the conflict must choose peace and negotiate in good faith, with lasting peace as the ultimate prize for the sake of the future of the DRC, the Great Lakes region, and Africa as a whole. I thank you.
我感谢南非代表的发言，下面我请津巴布韦代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Zimbabwe appreciates the briefings provided today and welcomes the presence of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, and La Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Her Excellency Therese Kaikwamba Wagner. The security situation in the Eastern DRC remains a matter of grave concern. That is why our region has devoted significant time and resources to addressing this crisis, recognizing its far-reaching implications for peace, stability, and development, not only in the DRC, but across the broader Great Lakes region. Indeed, some of our SADC citizens have made the ultimate sacrifice in pursuit of peace in the DRC. Recent high-level engagements underscore the urgency of the situation. The SADC Extraordinary Summit on 31 January 2025, followed by the joint SADC-EAC Summit on 8 February 2025, and the African Union Peace and Security Council Summit on 14 February 2025, all reaffirm the importance of African-led solutions. These efforts reflect the principle of subsidiarity. Mr. President, the principal responsibility for maintaining international peace and security rests with the United Nations Security Council. We therefore urge the Council to align its actions with the decisions and recommendations of African-led initiatives. Strengthening these regional mechanisms will ensure a more coordinated, effective, and contextually relevant response. Zimbabwe calls for support to ongoing regional efforts, particularly within the frameworks of the Rwanda and Nairobi processes. These initiatives are essential in addressing the escalating insecurity fueled by the insurgencies of M23 and other armed groups. In that regard, Zimbabwe welcomes the ongoing negotiations on the Security Council draft resolution. We hope that its adoption will complement regional efforts to achieve a peaceful solution to the conflict, and we hope that this will happen without any further delay. My delegation wishes to highlight 5 further priorities essential for restoring peace and stability in the DRC. 1, immediate cessation of hostilities and an unconditional ceasefire. Without an immediate and sustained ceasefire, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC will remain under threat with dire consequences for regional security. 2, withdrawal of M23 and its allies from captured territories, including Goma and Bukavu. 3, withdrawal of all foreign forces present in the DRC without invitation, including from neighboring countries. 4, protection of civilians and facilitation of humanitarian assistance. The ongoing conflict has inflicted untold suffering, leading to widespread displacement and humanitarian distress. It is imperative that humanitarian assistance reaches those most in need, while humanitarian actors are guaranteed a safe and secure environment to undertake their work. 5, ending the illicit exploitation and trafficking of natural resources. Addressing this root cause of conflict is critical to breaking the cycle of violence and fostering sustainable development in the DRC. Further, Zimbabwe strongly condemns attacks against UN peacekeepers and regional troops, which constitute violations of international law and may amount to war crimes. We denounce assault on SAMI DRC forces whose deployment was endorsed by the African Union Peace and Security Council in March 2024. Ensuring their safety is paramount. Mr. President, the Security Council must recognize that African-led peace processes offer the most viable path to a lasting solution in the DRC. Supporting the full implementation and harmonization of the Luanda-Nairobi processes is key to restoring stability. We therefore urge the Council to reinforce these mechanisms and ensure that its interventions align and support these efforts. I thank you, Mr. President.
我感谢津巴布韦代表的发言，我下面请马拉维代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me first to congratulate China for assuming the chairmanship of the Security Council for the month. I'd like to thank the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Affairs, Cooperation and the Francophone of DRC, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Council. The Republic of Malawi, as a committed member of the African Union and the Southern African Development Community, SADC, is joining shared concerns as advocated by the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, the Eastern African Community, the Economic Community of the Central African States, and other regional and international bodies, and is deeply concerned with the deteriorating security and humanitarian situation in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The ongoing offensive in both Nord-Kivu and Sud-Kivu, particularly involving the M23 supported by Rwanda, which has resulted in significant civilian suffering and regional instability. The Republic of Malawi stands in solidarity with the regional and international bodies and supports all efforts aimed at restoring peace, security, and stability in the region. The Republic of Malawi recognizes the complex and multifaceted nature of the conflict in the Eastern DRC and wish to emphasize the importance of a collaborative and inclusive approach to resolving the crisis. We commend the efforts of the African Union, the Eastern African Community, the Economic Community of the Central African States, the ICGLR, and SADC in addressing the situation and working towards sustainable peace. The Republic of Malawi fully supports the resolution aimed at restoring peace in Eastern DRC and echoes the call for all parties to engage in dialogue, cease hostilities, and prioritize the protection of civilians because one death is a life too many to lose. As a party to various regional and international peace instruments, the Republic of Malawi reaffirms its commitment to supporting initiatives that promote peace, security, and development in the Great Lakes region. We urge all stakeholders to work together in a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect to address the root causes of the conflict and ensure a peaceful environment for all. Malawi stands ready to contribute to these efforts and to support all parties' strong desire to pursue long-lasting peace in DRC. This is why Malawi has never hesitated to assist in such situations as a moral obligation. The Republic of Malawi is very concerned about reports of serious violations of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses by armed groups in DRC, including claims of high levels of sexual and gender-based violence. The Republic of Malawi is equally concerned with a growing number of forcibly displaced persons in eastern DRC because of the deteriorating security and humanitarian situation, and reiterates the need for all parties to pursue dialogue and to amicably resolve the crisis in DRC. On the same tone, the Republic of Malawi deplores any attacks on peacekeepers and humanitarian agents aimed at contributing to peace-building processes in DRC. As a committed member of the AU and SADC and advocate of the principles of other regional and international bodies, the Republic of Malawi calls for an immediate end of such attacks and urges all stakeholders to ensure the safety and security of peacekeepers and humanitarian personnel. Finally, Mr. President, allow me to thank the United Nations, member states, and all those partners who supported Malawi to repatriate the remains of our fallen troops back to Malawi, and those continuing to support peacekeeping operations missions. I thank you, Mr. President.
我感谢马拉维代表的发言。刚果民主共和国国务部长兼外交国际合作和法语国家事务部长卡伊宽巴瓦格纳女士阁下要求再次发言，我现在请她发言。
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil, depuis des mois, nous écoutons le Rwanda tenter de justifier l'injustifiable. Justifier son agression répétée, sa guerre d'occupation et le pillage de nos ressources. Aujourd'hui encore, nous avons entendu le représentant rwandais essayer de légitimer non seulement les attaques du Rwanda contre la République démocratique du Congo et son peuple, mais aussi ses attaques contre l'architecture juridique même de cette organisation. Nous avons écouté le Rwanda chercher à légitimer sa guerre après le déplacement de millions de civils, après le pillage de nos ressources par centaines de tonnes et même après l'assassinat de dizaines de casques bleus et de soldats de la paix africains. Je rappelle à ce Conseil que hier, le haut-commissaire aux droits de l'homme a documenté des exécutions sommaires d'enfants par la coalition RDF M23 à Bukavu. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil, tenter de justifier l'exécution d'enfants est si abject et ignoble que cela ne recevra aucune réponse de ma part aujourd'hui. Monsieur le représentant permanent du Rwanda, vous avez déjà perdu le combat de la vérité. Merci.